There's a variety of opinions and interpretations of Genesis chapter 2 and verse 17 and what it's actually referring to. So I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to talk about a particular point that I've heard some people teach that I want to show through Scripture that that shouldn't be looked at as a right way to interpret this passage. So this verse reads, "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die." Now there are people who teach that this passage is referring to spiritual death when Adam and Eve became dead in their trespasses and sins after eating the forbidden fruit. And this is my belief for a variety of reasons. But there's also people who believe and teach from this verse that it's referring to physical death. And their argument about how that it could be true that when it says the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die, is that very day, even though they didn't physically die, they began physically dying. So the death process started on that day. And so that's what they interpret the phrase "thou shalt surely die." They look it up and they interpret that as "dying you shall die." So they read that verse in the following way. It would read in their eyes, "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, dying you shall die." So that's how they interpret this passage of Scripture. So the phrase "thou shalt surely die," when we look up the word surely and the word die, they're the same word. They're just mentioned twice. So it's from the Hebrew word muth. And so what that phrase is just muth, muth. Two of the same words side by side. And so we can see examples all throughout the Old Testament of how those words are used. And when we start applying the understanding that it means "dying you shall die," it leads to a lot of confusion because much context using those two words together are not saying that. They're not saying "dying you shall die." A perfect example is in 1 Kings chapter 2. We read about how, well, I'll just read it. 1 Kings chapter 2 is starting at verse 36. It says, "And the king sent and called for Shimei, and said unto him, Build thee an house in Jerusalem, and dwell there, and go not forth thence any whither. For it shall be that on the day thou goest out and passest over the brook Kidron, thou shalt know for certain that thou shalt surely die. Thy blood shall be upon thine own head." So Shimei was told that the very day that thou goest out and passest over the brook Kidron, thou shalt know for certain that thou shalt surely die. Now, if this meant "dying you shall die," this would be totally pointless. It would prove nothing because at this time, all men are going to eventually die. But he says, "The day that you do this, you shall surely die." And that "surely die" here is the same as in Genesis 2:17. It's from the Hebrew words muth for surely and muth for the word die. So it's muth, muth. "And thy blood shall be upon thine own head. And Shimei said unto the king, The saying is good. As my lord the king hath said, so will thy servant do. And Shimei dwelt in Jerusalem many days. And it came to pass at the end of 3 years that two of the servants of Shimei ran away unto Achish, son of Maachah, king of Gath. And they told Shimei, saying, Behold, thy servants be in Gath. And Shimei arose and saddled his ass and went to Gath to Achish to seek his servants. And Shimei went and brought his servants from Gath. And it was told Solomon that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and was come again. And the king sent and called for Shimei, and said unto him, Did I not make thee to swear by the Lord, and protested unto thee, saying, Know for a certain on the day thou goest out and walkest abroad any whither, that thou shalt surely die? And thou saidst unto me, The word that I have heard is good. Why then hast thou not kept the oath of the Lord, and the commandment that I have charged thee with? The king said moreover to Shimei, Thou knowest all the wickedness which thine heart is privy to, that thou didst to David my father. Therefore the Lord shall return thy wickedness upon thine own head. And King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. So the king commanded Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, which went out and fell upon him, that he died, and the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. So here we see that the very day that he disobeyed was when he physically died. It wasn't saying dying you shall die. It was saying that the very day that happens, you're going to die. So when we understand that there's other places where it says, when it says thou shalt surely die, and it's using the exact same Hebrew phrase as Genesis 2:17, it's referring to that very day. When we understand that the context of Genesis chapter 2 in verse 17 is not physical death, but spiritual death, when Adam and Eve became dead in their trespasses and sins when they partook of the forbidden fruit, all of a sudden this verse can be understood in this right context without having to say or imply that surely die means dying you shall die. Rather, it meant the very day they did that thing, they died. And it was spiritual death, not physical. This video is not going to go into detail because this is part of a series I've done. I'm going to add to the series I've done on the doctrine of original sin. But be sure to watch that series and the first few videos in that series that talk about the reason why this is referring to spiritual death, to become dead in your trespasses and sin, and not physical death, because physical death is what Adam forced upon all mankind. Spiritual death is what takes place when we sin. When we sin, we are separated from God. We become dead in our trespasses and sins. And Adam and Eve had nothing to do with that being forced on us, because sin is a choice. It's a choice we make. But the physical death aspect, because of what Adam did, and he banished all of mankind, no longer has access to the tree of life in the Garden of Eden because of him. Because of that act, he forced physical death upon all mankind, so that it is appointed unto man once to die now. And it's because we don't have access to the tree of life that would have allowed us to partake of it and live eternally from a physical life perspective. And so I'll just end that here, but be sure to look at those first few videos in the series to go deeper into that understanding, to hear more about that. And I'm going to also do a video that summarizes everything that I've done in the original sin series. For those of you who may have watched a lot of the videos but are having a hard time putting it all together as one whole understanding. So be sure to keep a lookout for that video. I know it will help some of you. And I hope that this has been helpful in some way to see a greater understanding of the phrase "thou shalt surely die" and how it's used elsewhere in Scripture to show that it took place that very day, not the understanding of dying you shall die. So anyway, I'll end this here, and keep a lookout for more upcoming videos. All right, God bless.